The first time my mother-in-law, Patricia, suggested we reconsider bringing Mia to the annual Hastings Family Gala, I thought I'd misheard her. We were sitting in her pristine Palo Alto sunroom, the kind of space that costs more to decorate than most people's yearly salary, surrounded by orchids that probably had their own personal gardener. She'd just finished explaining the theme, an evening of elegance and legacy, when she delicately placed her bone china teacup down and gave me that smile. You know the one. The smile that's supposed to soften a blow, but really just makes it cut deeper. "It's just that these events are so formal, Charlotte," Patricia said, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that isn't concern at all. "And Mia is at such an energetic age. Perhaps it would be better if she stayed home with a sitter this year. We wouldn't want her to feel out of place." The way she emphasized out of place made my stomach turn. My daughter was 7 years old. 7! And already they were deciding she didn't fit their carefully curated world? I looked over at my husband, James, expecting him to jump in, to defend our daughter, to tell his mother that Mia was a Hastings too, whether she liked it or not. Instead, he studied his phone with sudden, intense interest, his jaw tight. That's when I knew this wasn't a spontaneous suggestion. They talked about this, planned it, maybe even rehearsed it. "Mia's been looking forward to this for months," I said, keeping my voice level even though everything inside me wanted to scream. "She picked out her dress 3 weeks ago. She's been practicing her curtsies in front of the mirror." I watched Patricia's face carefully, looking for any crack in that porcelain facade, any hint of the grandmother who'd once promised to love my daughter unconditionally. I found nothing. "Of course she's excited," Richard, my father-in-law, interjected from his leather armchair, not bothering to look up from the Wall Street Journal. "Children always are. But Charlotte, you have to understand, the Hastings Foundation Gala isn't a child's birthday party. We have donors, board members, people who expect a certain atmosphere. Last year, Mia knocked over a champagne tower." "She was 6, I said, my voice sharper now. "And it was an accident. She apologized to everyone there." "An expensive accident," Patricia murmured, examining her manicure. "Those were crystal flutes from Baccarat. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is that this event represents something important, our family's reputation, our standing in the community. And while we love Mia dearly, we just think it might be premature to include her in these more sophisticated gatherings." The way she said, "love Mia dearly," made it sound like a disclaimer on a product nobody actually wanted. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that had been building for months, maybe years. Every subtle comment about Mia's loud laugh, every raised eyebrow when she preferred soccer to ballet, every suggestion that maybe she needed more refinement. They'd been leading up to this moment, and I'd been too caught up in trying to fit into their world to see it clearly. James finally spoke up, his voice careful and measured. "Mom, Dad, I think you're being a bit harsh. Mia's just a kid. She'll learn." But there was no fire in his defense, no real conviction. He was doing what he always did, trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy, trying to avoid rocking the boat that his family had built over 3 generations of Silicon Valley success and old California money. "Of course she'll learn," Patricia agreed quickly, sensing an opening. "That's exactly why we think it's better to wait. Let her mature a bit. These events can be overwhelming for children who aren't quite ready for them. We're thinking of her, Charlotte. We truly are." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a second I almost believed her. Almost. I drove home in silence while James tried to justify his parents' position. "They're not trying to exclude her," he insisted, one hand on the steering wheel of his Tesla, the other gesturing vaguely. I stared out the window at the perfectly manicured lawns of Atherton, each house more massive than the last, each one representing a family that probably had their own version of Patricia and Richard, their own standards of who belonged and who didn't. "Your daughter doesn't fit their aesthetic," I said flatly. "That's what they're really saying. She's too much, too loud, too herself, and they can't have that tainting their precious image. James flinched but didn't argue, which told me everything I needed to know. He knew I was right. He just didn't want to admit it. That night, I lay awake while James slept peacefully beside me, his breathing steady and untroubled. Mia was down the hall, probably dreaming about the gala, about wearing her princess dress and seeing the ballroom her daddy had described. She didn't know yet that her grandparents had decided she wasn't good enough. She didn't know that the family she'd been born into came with conditions, with expectations, with an image that mattered more than she did. I thought about the past 8 years, about how I'd bent and stretched and reshaped myself to fit into the Hastings world. I'd come from a solidly middle-class background in Sacramento. My dad was a contractor, my mom a public school teacher. We'd been comfortable, but never wealthy. When I met James at Stanford, I'd been a scholarship student studying economics, working 2 part-time jobs to cover what the financial aid didn't. He'd been drawn to what he called my authenticity, my refreshing perspective. What he'd really meant was that I was different enough to be interesting, but malleable enough to be molded. And molded I was. Patricia had taken me shopping at Neiman Marcus, teaching me which designers were acceptable and which were trying too hard. She'd corrected my table manners at family dinners, always with a smile and just a little tip, dear. She'd suggested I get highlights to brighten up my dark hair, that I consider Pilates instead of my usual gym routine, that I read certain books and attend certain functions and know certain people. Slowly, piece by piece, I'd let Charlotte Brennan disappear and become Charlotte Hastings, the perfect daughter-in-law for a perfect family with a perfect image. But Mia was her own person from the day she was born. She had James's dark hair and his intense focus, but she had my stubbornness, my loud laugh, my inability to be anything other than exactly who she was. She asked questions at inappropriate times. She preferred climbing trees to sitting still. She made friends with everyone, from the gardener's kids to the children of Patricia's country club friends, seeing no difference between them. She was wonderful and wild and completely herself, and the Hastings family was slowly trying to sand down all her edges until she fit into their carefully constructed world. I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I started making calls. The first was to my old college roommate, Simone, who worked in investigative journalism in San Francisco. "I need you to look into something for me," I told her, my voice low, even though James had already left for his venture capital firm's morning meetings. "The Hastings Foundation. I want to know where the money comes from and where it goes. Everything." Simone was quiet for a moment. "Charlotte, are you sure about this? The Hastings family is... I know what they are. That's why I need to know the truth. Can you do it or not?" She agreed, and I could hear the curiosity in her voice. Simone lived for stories like this, for the secrets that powerful families try to bury under layers of charity galas and public relations. My second call was to my personal attorney, Marcus Chen, a sharp-minded lawyer I'd kept on retainer after a particularly nasty contract dispute at the tech startup I'd co-founded 4 years ago. Yes, I had my own company. That was something the Hastings family conveniently forgot when they treated me like an ornament on James's arm. Next-Gen Solutions had started as a small consulting firm helping companies navigate digital transformation, but it had grown rapidly. We'd just closed a Series B funding round that valued us at $150 million, and I owned 40% of it outright. "Marcus, I need you to pull every financial document related to my marriage," I said. "Prenup, joint accounts, investment portfolios, everything. And I need a full breakdown of the Hastings family trust structure." I could practically hear him sitting up straighter on the other end of the line. Marcus loved a good financial puzzle, and the Hastings empire was a labyrinth of trusts, LLCs, and strategic investments that most people couldn't begin to untangle. "Are we preparing for something specific?" he asked carefully. "I'm preparing to understand exactly where I stand," I replied, "and exactly what leverage I have. Because that's what it came down to, didn't it? leverage, power. The Hastings family operated on it, wielded it like a weapon, and it was time I learned to speak their language fluently. Over the next 2 weeks, I played the dutiful daughter-in-law. I smiled at Patricia's comments about Mia's boisterous energy. I nodded when Richard suggested that perhaps Mia would benefit from a more structured environment at boarding school, at 7 years old. I even agreed to have lunch with Patricia and her friends at the country club, where they discussed their children's accomplishments and their grandchildren's futures like they were comparing stock portfolios. But while I smiled and nodded, Simone was digging, and what she found was fascinating. The Hastings Foundation, that pillar of charitable giving and community service, that beacon of the family's generosity and civic commitment, was funded almost entirely by 3 sources: Richard's early investments in tech companies during the first dot-com boom, Patricia's family money from old San Francisco real estate holdings, and, this was the interesting part, a significant and ongoing contribution from a trust that James had access to but didn't control. The trust had been set up by James's grandfather, old William Hastings, and it had a specific provision. The funds were meant for the continuation and prosperity of the Hastings family line. James received a generous allowance from it, used it to supplement his VC salary, and had always assumed the principal would eventually pass to him. What he apparently didn't know, or had never bothered to investigate, was that the trust could be contested under certain circumstances, particularly if the trustees were found to be acting against the interests of the direct heirs. Direct heirs, like Mia. Marcus confirmed what Simone had uncovered. "The language is pretty clear," he explained during a coffee meeting at a quiet cafe in Menlo Park, far from anywhere the Hastings family would frequent. William Hastings set up this trust to benefit his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. All of them. The trustees, currently Patricia and Richard, are supposed to manage it for the benefit of all heirs equally. If they're showing favoritism or excluding a legitimate heir, that's grounds for legal action. "What about my company?" I asked. "How does that factor in?" Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that meant he was about to deliver good news. Next Gen Solutions is entirely separate from anything Hastings related. It's your company, your success, your money. You've been smart about keeping it siloed. But here's what's really interesting. Your company's valuation means you're actually worth more on paper right now than James is. His assets are mostly tied up in that trust and some relatively modest personal investments. You, on the other hand, have liquid value. I let that sink in. Somewhere along the way, while I'd been busy trying to fit into the Hastings mold, I'd actually surpassed them financially. At least, I'd surpassed James. NextGen was my creation, my risk, my success. The Hastings family had nothing to do with it, had barely acknowledged it existed beyond Patricia's occasional comment about how quaint it was that I had a little business. "There's something else," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "The annual operating budget for the Hastings family lifestyle." I had a forensic accountant run the numbers based on public records and some educated estimates. The house in Atherton, the place in Napa, the cottage in Lake Tahoe, the country club memberships, the cars, the private schools for any future grandchildren they plan to enroll, the charity functions. It all adds up to roughly $2.8 million a year in expenses. "And their income?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be illuminating. Richard's VC firm pays him well, but most of his personal wealth is on paper. Equity in companies, real estate that's appreciated but not liquid. Patricia's trust fund covers about $400,000 a year. The Hastings Foundation itself is a nonprofit, so they can't just pull money from it for personal use, though they do pay themselves administrative salaries that are pretty generous. But the real money, the money that keeps everything running smoothly, that comes from the family trust, the one they control, the one that's meant for James and now Mia. I closed the folder and looked out the window at the parking lot. watching a young mother load groceries into a minivan while her toddler babbled in the car seat. Such a normal scene. Such a different world from the one I'd been living in. So they're using Mia's inheritance to fund their lifestyle? I said slowly. And they have the nerve to tell me she doesn't fit their image? Essentially, yes, Marcus confirmed. And if you wanted to make things complicated for them, you absolutely could. A challenge to the trust administration, especially one backed by evidence of bias against a legitimate heir, would freeze the distributions while it was investigated. Could take months, maybe years. That's a long time to go without $2.8 million in annual funding. I thought about Mia, about her bright smile and her boundless energy, about the way she'd been practicing her curtsy in front of her mirror, so excited to be included in the family gala. I thought about James, who loved his daughter, but loved his parents' approval more. I thought about Patricia and Richard, who measured worth in prestige and appearances, who saw my daughter as a liability to their carefully maintained image. And I thought about power. Real power. Not the kind that came from old money and older names, but the kind that came from knowing exactly where the leverage points were and being willing to use them. The gala was in 3 days. I had a plan. I spent those 3 days preparing, not just myself, but my presentation. I'd learned from the Hastings family that image was everything, so I made sure mine was flawless. I had my hair done at Patricia's favorite salon. I wore the Valentino gown I'd been saving for a special occasion, the one that had cost more than my first car, but made me look like I belonged in the pages of Vogue. I hired a makeup artist who'd worked with celebrities. When I looked in the mirror, I saw Charlotte Hastings, the perfect Silicon Valley wife, the ideal daughter-in-law. But I also made sure Mia looked perfect too. Her dress was a beautiful blush pink creation from a children's boutique in San Francisco, age-appropriate but elegant. I had her hair styled in soft curls. She looked like what she was, a beautiful 7-year-old girl excited to attend a fancy party with her family. James had tried to bring up the Mia situation twice in those 3 days. The first time, I'd simply said, "Your daughter is going to the gala." End of discussion. The second time, when he pushed harder, when he started with, "Maybe my parents have a point," I'd looked at him with such cold fury that he'd actually taken a step back. "Your parents," I'd said quietly, "don't get to decide whether my daughter is good enough for your family. If you have a problem with that, James, we can discuss it with lawyers present." He hadn't brought it up again. The night of the gala, we arrived at the San Francisco Four Seasons Ballroom, where the Hastings Foundation held its annual fundraiser. The room was spectacular, dripping in crystals and gold accents, with massive floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Patricia and Richard stood near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced smiles and firm handshakes. When they saw us approaching, James, me, and Mia holding my hand in her pink dress, Patricia's smile froze. "Charlotte," she said, her voice tight, "I thought we discussed—" "We did," I interrupted smoothly, matching her smile with one of my own. "You suggested Mia might be overwhelmed. I disagreed. She's a Hastings after all. This is her heritage too." I watched the calculation in Patricia's eyes, the quick assessment of whether to make a scene or let it go. She chose the latter, but her eyes promised we'd discuss this later. The evening proceeded exactly as these events always did. Speeches about the foundation's good works, testimonials from organizations they'd funded, a silent auction featuring luxury items that wealthy people bid on so they could feel charitable while acquiring more things they didn't need. Mia was on her best behavior, polite and charming, proving every single one of Patricia's concerns wrong. I networked and smiled and made small talk with people I'd known for years now, donors and board members and other wealthy families who circulated in the same rarefied air as the Hastings, and I waited for my moment. It came during the speeches, right after Richard had finished his presentation about the Foundation's mission and future goals. The event coordinator, a woman named Helen, who I'd carefully befriended over the past year, announced, "And now we have a special surprise presentation from one of our longtime supporters and family members, Charlotte Hastings." I saw Patricia's head snap up, saw the confusion and then alarm in her eyes. This wasn't on the program. She looked at Richard, who looked equally confused. James turned to me, and I gave him a reassuring smile before I stood and made my way to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady and clear. "For those who don't know me, I'm Charlotte Hastings, married to James for 8 wonderful years, and mother to beautiful Mia, who many of you met tonight." I paused, letting that sink in, watching Mia beam from her seat beside her confused father. I've been a part of this family for nearly a decade now, and I've watched the Hastings Foundation do truly remarkable work in our community. Education initiatives, arts programs, support for underprivileged children. It's genuinely inspiring. Patricia was standing now, trying to catch my eye, probably trying to signal me to sit down, to stop talking. I ignored her. But tonight, I want to talk about something equally important: family, heritage, legacy, the values we pass down to the next generation. I gestured toward Mia. My daughter is the future of the Hastings family. She represents everything this foundation claims to support: youth, potential, promise. And yet, just 2 weeks ago, I was told she didn't fit the family image, that she wasn't quite ready for an event like this, that perhaps it would be better if she stayed home. The room had gone completely silent. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. I saw board members exchanging glances, donors leaning forward with interest, and Patricia's face turning a shade of white that matched the tablecloths. "Now, I'm not telling you this to embarrass anyone," I continued, though we all knew that wasn't entirely true. "I'm telling you this because I think it's important to examine what we mean when we talk about image and legacy. What are we really protecting, and at what cost?" I pulled out my phone, where I'd prepared a presentation. On the screens around the ballroom, numbers began to appear. "These are the annual operating expenses for the Hastings family, personal expenses, not foundation expenses. $2.8 million a year for homes, cars, memberships, lifestyle maintenance. All very nice, all very appropriate for a family of their standing." More numbers appeared. "And this is the funding source for much of that lifestyle, the William Hastings Family Trust, established to provide for the patriarch's heirs, all of his heirs, including 7-year-old Mia." I watched understanding dawn on faces around the room. These were smart people, wealthy people who understood trusts and inheritance and fiduciary duty. "The trustees of that fund have a legal obligation to manage it for the benefit of all heirs equally, not to exclude heirs who don't meet certain aesthetic standards, not to decide that some grandchildren fit the image better than others, but that's exactly what's been happening." Patricia found her voice. "Charlotte, this is completely inappropriate." "What's inappropriate," I cut her off, my voice sharp now, "is telling a 7-year-old child that she's not good enough. What's inappropriate is using her inheritance to fund a lifestyle you claim she doesn't deserve to be part of. What's inappropriate is placing image over family." I looked directly at my mother-in-law, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes: fear. "So here's what's going to happen. Mia will be included in all family events from now on. No conditions, no suggestions that she stay home. She will be treated with the same respect and love afforded to any Hastings heir. And in return, I won't file a formal challenge to the trust administration, which would freeze all distributions for the duration of the investigation." The room was buzzing now, whispers spreading like wildfire. I could see phone cameras recording, capturing what would undoubtedly be the social event story of the season. "But more than that," I continued, my voice softening slightly, "I'm announcing a new initiative. Starting next quarter, Next Gen Solutions will be matching all Hastings Foundation donations dollar for dollar, with one condition. 20% of all funds must go toward programs that serve children exactly like Mia, Energetic children, loud children, children who don't quite fit the mold but deserve support and opportunity anyway. I pulled out a check from my clutch, already made out and signed. $500,000 to start. Because unlike some people, I don't think children need to fit a certain image to deserve investment in their future. I handed the check to Helen, who took it with barely concealed delight. This was the kind of drama that would have donors talking for months, which meant more attention, more money, more prestige for the foundation. Patricia might hate me, but the foundation would thrive. Now, I said, returning to my seat as the room erupted in applause, let's continue with this wonderful evening. After all, we're here to celebrate family, aren't we? I sat down next to James, who looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Mia was clapping along with everyone else, not quite understanding what had happened, but knowing somehow that it was important, that she'd been defended. The rest of the evening was a blur of people approaching me, some to congratulate me on the donation, others clearly fishing for gossip about the family drama I'd just exposed. Patricia and Richard left early, claiming Patricia had a migraine, but not before Patricia leaned in and whispered, "This isn't over, Charlotte." I smiled and whispered back, "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." In the car on the way home, Mia fell asleep in her car seat, exhausted from the excitement. James drove in silence for a long time before finally speaking. I don't even know what that was. "That was me setting boundaries," I said calmly. "That was me protecting our daughter. That was me reminding your family that they're not the only ones with power." "You humiliated my parents," he said, but there was no real anger in his voice, just exhaustion. "Your parents tried to exclude our daughter from her own family," I countered. "What I did was public. What they were doing was private, but no less damaging. I just brought it into the light." He was quiet for another mile. Then, "The trust challenge. Were you serious about that?" "Completely," I said. "Marcus has all the paperwork ready to file. If your parents want to test me on this, if they want to continue treating Mia like she's not good enough, I will absolutely follow through. And you know what will happen? The trust will be frozen, the distributions will stop, and suddenly that $2.8 million lifestyle will need to come from somewhere else." "They'll never forgive you," James said softly. I looked at him in the darkness of the car. The man I'd married, the man who'd let his parents criticize our daughter without standing up for her, the man who'd chosen peace over principles. "I don't need their forgiveness," I said. "I need their respect. And now I have it, because now they understand that I'm not someone who can be pushed around anymore. I'm not the scholarship student from Sacramento trying to fit in. I'm Charlotte Hastings, and I have my own power, my own money, and my own ability to make their lives very complicated if they cross me." James didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. When we got home, he carried Mia up to her room, still in her pink dress, and tucked her into bed. I stood in the doorway watching this man and this child, this family I'd built and would protect at any cost. The next morning, I woke to 17 text messages. Most were from other foundation board members and donors, congratulating me on the donation and the new initiative. 2 were from journalists, wanting to know more about the family trust situation they'd heard about. 1 was from Patricia, 3 words long: "We need to talk." I called her from my home office, closing the door even though James had taken Mia to her Sunday soccer game. Patricia answered on the first ring. "What you did last night was unconscionable," she said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. "What you tried to do to my daughter was worse," I replied. "The difference is I did it publicly, and I did it with a $500,000 donation to your foundation. You're welcome, by the way." I could hear her breathing, trying to control her anger. "You've made yourself very powerful enemies, Charlotte." I laughed, surprising both of us. "No, Patricia, I've made myself someone you can't ignore or dismiss anymore. There's a difference. And here's the thing you need to understand. I don't want to be your enemy. I just want my daughter to be treated with the same love and respect you'd give any other Hastings heir. That's it. That's all this is about." "She's 7, Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. She's difficult. She's loud. She doesn't fit your image, I finished for her. Yes, I know, you've made that abundantly clear, but here's what you're missing. She's also brilliant and kind and full of joy. She's everything good about this family without any of the pretension. And if you can't see that, if you can't appreciate that, then that's your loss, not hers. There was a long silence. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from Patricia before, something almost vulnerable. I built this life very carefully, Charlotte. Every piece, every relationship, every appearance, it matters. I know it does, I said, my voice softening slightly. But Mia matters more. She has to matter more. And if protecting your image means sacrificing your granddaughter's sense of belonging, then your image isn't worth protecting. Another silence. The trust, Patricia said finally. You would really challenge it? In a heartbeat, I confirmed. I've already had attorneys review the structure. William Hastings was very clear about his intentions. All heirs, equally. If you continue to show bias against Mia, if you continue to exclude her or treat her as less than, then yes, I'll file the challenge. And we both know what that means for your lifestyle funding. I heard her exhale, a sound of defeat she probably didn't mean to let escape. And if we include her, treat her as you're demanding, then we're family, I said simply. Then Next Gen continues to match donations. Then we all move forward. I'm not trying to destroy you, Patricia. I'm just trying to protect my daughter. Give me that, and everything else can be fine. The conversation ended without any warm reconciliation, without any promises of newfound love between grandmother and granddaughter. But it ended with an understanding, a detente built on mutual leverage and clear boundaries. Patricia knew I wasn't bluffing, and I knew that for all her faults, she was ultimately pragmatic. She'd choose image and lifestyle preservation over her pride. Over the following months, things shifted. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. Mia was included in family dinners without comment about her energy level. Patricia even took her shopping once, just the two of them, and came back with stories about Mia's fashion opinions and her sharp observations about the other shoppers. Richard started asking her about soccer, actually listening to her enthusiastic recaps of her games. It wasn't perfect. Patricia still made the occasional comment about proper behavior, and Richard still seemed more comfortable around quiet, studious children than energetic ones. But they tried. They made effort. And Mia, blessed with the resilience of childhood, accepted their renewed attention without holding grudges. James and I went to couples therapy. Turned out there was a lot to unpack about his inability to stand up to his parents, about my resentment of his passivity, about the way we'd both let his family's expectations shape our marriage. It was hard work, confronting those truths. Some days I wasn't sure we'd make it. But slowly, he began to understand what I'd been trying to tell him all along. Protecting our daughter had to come before protecting his parents' feelings. Next Gen Solutions continued to grow, and my matching donation program became one of the foundation's signature initiatives. Other tech entrepreneurs joined in, inspired by what they saw as a stand against exclusionary practices in philanthropy. The MIA initiative, as some board members jokingly called it, ended up funding programs for thousands of kids who didn't fit traditional molds, kids who were too loud or too quiet or too different to get support from more conventional sources. And Mia, she continued to be exactly who she'd always been, bright and energetic and unapologetically herself. The only difference was that now her family celebrated those qualities instead of trying to diminish them. She still knocked things over occasionally. She still asked inappropriate questions at formal dinners. She still preferred climbing trees to sitting still. But she also knew, with absolute certainty, that her mother would move heaven and earth to protect her, that she was valued exactly as she was, that fitting someone else's image was never worth losing yourself. One night, about a year after the gala, Mia came into my home office where I was reviewing quarterly reports. She climbed into my lap, all elbows and knees and complete disregard for personal space, and asked, "Mommy, why did Grandma not like me before?" I thought carefully about how to answer. Sometimes grown-ups have ideas about how things should be, I said slowly, and when reality doesn't match their ideas, they get confused and react badly. Grandma wanted you to be a certain way, and when you weren't, she didn't know how to handle it. But now she does? Mia asked. I smiled. Now she understands that her way isn't the only way, and that you're perfect just as you are. Mia considered this seriously. Did you teach her that? I reminded her, I said. Sometimes people need reminding about what's really important. Like standing up for people you love, Mia said. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, I agreed. She hugged me tight and then bounced off to her room, already moving on to the next thing, the next adventure, the next moments of joy. I watched her go, this magnificent child who'd taught me more about courage and authenticity than any business success ever could. My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia. Sunday dinner at 6. Mia wants to show us her new soccer trophy. No other context, no grand declarations of change, just an invitation. Just family. I typed back, "We'll be there." And just like that, we were.